Information about the world of running, inspiration to fuel passion and excellence, and ideas for making connections and finding community. You're listening to A to Z Running. Hi everyone, welcome to the A to Z Running podcast where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach. And Stefanie Flippin, USA 100-mile champ and top 10 all-time in the world at that distance, talks about how to endure, from keys to preparing properly to game-changing insights and lessons on the show today. And stick around after that for this week's World of Running update. A horde of men running under 28 minutes in Japan. My words.
Horde?
Not Japan Running News' words. And an incredible Manchester race in the fastest known Turkey. All of that on the show today. So clearly, it's great. The question is, do you have all the information you need? And probably not, unless you have gone to AtoZrunning.com. You've looked for the word follow, clicked on it, followed all the steps involved, and then gone to the places where you like to consume content. YouTube, podcasts, stuff. We're on Apple, we're on Google, we're on all of those things, and social media if you prefer there.
And if you do, sometimes we get a chance to connect with you. Pedal Princess writes poetry about running and endurance sports, and she writes lots of great poetry, but I picked out one to share this week.
Are you going to read poetry on air?
Yes, I'm going to read poetry on air. It's very relevant to the topic
you should
of
give
running.
a disclaimer before you ever do this to people. Say, I'm about to read poetry.
I'm about to read poetry.
Good.
When the road is blocked, find another road. This challenge a gift you've been bestowed. You are a warrior, let it be known. This is your training to own. Sarah Sauter. And Sarah replied when I had first asked if I could share this, and she said yes. And then she replied on that post, "Thank you for the kind words. Your timing is impeccable too, as I come upon another crossroads with an unexpected and unexplained roadblock." She explained some injury. Running has a way of highlighting the poetic rhythms of life. I'm taking heed like you and slowing down to focus on that important strength and mobility work. We got this. Which is relevant to our topic today. Yes, this is the conversation that we're having today with Stefanie. So I really appreciated that from Sarah and of course, her skills of poetry writing.
Thank you, Sarah.
So thank you, Sarah.
Speaking of pertinence, also relevant to today's sponsor.
Yes.
Which is
taking care of our bodies.
Hip Hook by Aletha.
I have one of my hairs on it because I've been using it a lot. This is really funny.
It's great. Hopefully you're not watching this now as Andy untangles hair from...
Yours will not come with hairs attached to them.
You also should not be using this on your head.
Yep, that is a disclaimer. You'll find how to use this, videos, and lots of tutorials on Hip Hook's website. And that's Aletha Health. So you'll want to check that out. But of course, the Hip Hook, I've been mentioning it on the podcast and on social media because it releases those hard to reach hip flexor muscles like the iliacus and the psoas, which has been imperative for my road to recovery.
Drop the mic. Now, one of these considerations with stuff like this is that there's lots of different kinds of recovery tools that all do largely similar things. This is entirely unique. Yeah. So if you have particular issues related to that spot precisely, this is the kind of tool that does things that others do not. So worth a consideration. Yep.
Very helpful. And we can get you a discount.
Look at that.
At checkout, put in the code ATOZ.
A to Z.
That's ATOZ for 10% off.
10% off, which goes a long way on the Hip Hook. So keep in mind that if you got hip issues and you've never tried something quite like this, it's worth a try.
Absolutely. So thanks to our sponsor, Aletha Health.
And with that, let's get on now to our main topic.
2021 U.S. 100-mile champion Stefanie Flippin joins us to talk about how to handle the load. Enduring the load. Flippin is a great person to heed advice from since she has done multiple 100-mile races at a high level and has stayed injury-free for a decade.
Okay.
Yeah.
Listen.
We got to listen up to this woman. So Stefanie Flippin, who is she? She's a professional runner, ultra runner for Hoka, and she lives in Colorado. She has spent 22 years of her life in San Diego and graduated from the University of California. Stefanie comes from a background of competitive ballet and didn't turn to distance running until she was in medical school as a way to manage her stress. She completed her first marathon in 2012 and soon after her first 50-miler and 100-mile races. Stefanie is, of course, like I mentioned before, the 2021 USATF 100-mile national champion, and she's the course record holder in a time of 14 hours and 35 minutes.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
She is also the 2021 and 2020 Tunnel Hill 100-mile female champion and has raced dozens of ultras from the 50K to the 100-mile distances. She is currently the 4th fastest American and 6th fastest in the world in the 100-mile distance with her PR of 14:04. Stefanie is also one of 10 runners in the country to be nominated for the USATF Mountain Trail Ultra Runner of the Year in 2021. Stefanie is the co-owner of her private practice that she has alongside her husband, Mitchell, in Lakewood, Colorado, where she practices as a foot and ankle clinician and surgeon. So this woman does a lot of things,
So
including
she knows it inside and
she
out.
does, and she's a coach too at Lift, Run, Perform. So she helps lead an international team of about 50 athletes.
So you're getting the best of from someone who does it, someone who helps teach other people how to do it, and someone who understands how it works at an anatomical level.
Yes. So
you don't get that all in one place often.
No. So we are thrilled and honored to have Stefanie Flippin join us today on the A to Z Running Podcast. Hi, Stefanie. Welcome to the A to Z Running Podcast.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me, Andy.
Oh, well, I am so excited because I've been wanting to have you on the podcast for a long time. And actually, the timing right now couldn't be more perfect.
Yeah.
You coming off of a PR. So first of all, congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
And a
Thank
big
you so
win,
much.
of course.
Yeah.
Let's just get started there. Do you want to talk through that race with us? I'm sure our audience would love to hear.
Yeah. So I am coming off of racing Tunnel Hill 100. It was actually a bit of a pivot in my racing schedule. I raced Tunnel Hill 100 last year. And things just kind of panned out to where I decided to return again this year. I'm really, really glad I did. I was able to defend my title as I won last year. And I was also able to take a significant amount of time off, not only my PR, but the time I ran on the course last year, which was really, really awesome to do. So yeah.
I mean, the win and a PR, and you set some other PRs within the race, correct?
Yeah. So, from a pacing perspective, I don't know how great it is to say that I, PR'd in the 50-mile and 100K along the way. I think it's more so of the fact that I don't have a lot of fast 50-mile and 100K races under my belt. That's kind of more of why I think that happened. But yeah, I was able to log some pretty strong splits through the 50-mile and then the 100K, and then as well as about a 30-minute PR in the 100-mile distance in 14:04. Wow. So yeah, very pleased. Yeah.
Congratulations. That's incredible.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you are an expert at these long distances. You're the USATF 100-mile champion. Yeah. And you, the last 5 races you've won that you've run, which is absolutely incredible. So there's a lot to unpack with you, and especially with your expertise in the medical field, I was hoping we could bring that in too for our listeners.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And we'll talk about the physical load of running and then some of the mental and physical strategies that you employ to be able to do these long, massive runs.
Yeah. Great. Understatement, right?
Yeah. Understatement of the century.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's start with the physical load of running a 100-mile race. And what do you do? Let's start with preparation and then we'll move to the race itself.
Yeah. So, I feel like a lot of folks out there probably see or they're probably thinking the training, in the weeks leading up to a 100-mile race, it absolutely has to be high mileage. I feel like, yes, that is true. The 100-mile distance is something, and I feel like it's the main reason why I really love it. But the distance is something that exposes you, like it strips you down. You can't get away with evading strength work, the pure mileage, the specificity. Tunnel Hill is a fast course. It's certainly not, it's the total opposite of something of say like hard rock. So there still has to be, a mainstay of speed work in there. Obviously it's relative. If you have 5K listeners, they're like speed work. So it's relative. But like I said, you can't, with the distance, you can't really skip any of those things. And that's probably true also, for the marathon. But I just so strongly feel that if you aren't lifting, if you aren't doing like very specific strength work for the 100-mile distance, it's not going to feel good. And I come from a place of experience with that because I've certainly ran multiple 100-mile races where even last year in 2020 at Tunnel Hill, I was honestly very disappointed in myself when I came through the 50-mile mark, just at how like fatigued my legs were. And to me, that was, just kind of a sign that I just hadn't been as consistent as I should have been with lifting and strength. So yeah, it's definitely a distance where you have to be able to bulletproof your body in terms of getting it prepared to go that long. And if you have specific time goals, like I said, you really have to be on top of all of the little things, including nutrition. Fueling is a huge, huge part, of the race itself. But yeah, in terms of physical load, I'm certainly more of a high mileage runner, but that's not to say that every single person lining up for a 100-miler like has to be. Again, I'm sure, high mileage, that term is relative for all of us. But for me, I feel like strength work has been the biggest mainstay in keeping me healthy and getting me to that finish line as fast as possible. So, yeah.
So how as a medical professional, is there anything that has informed, I'm sure that there is, but what things have informed your running, or what things were you surprised by when you took on this sport? Was there anything that you're like, wow, these are things that I'm discovering along the way because of my knowledge in the medical field?
I really feel like there is such an importance on mobility work. Again, I feel like that's something that, you can get away with not doing it, but the difference that I feel in terms of incorporating it, and I'm talking like active isolated stretching, dynamic stretching, things like that, like those things for me have really, I feel like, given me that sort of edge and bumped me up to that next level. Over the years, I've learned it's not just running. Like, it's not just about putting in the time on your feet. Again, that's obviously critical, and important, but I feel like mobility work, and like I said, like dynamic stretching has really been a huge game changer for me. And really, it may not just be like from a form perspective, it may also be from a preventative perspective too, in terms of keeping those, all of us have tight hamstrings. That just kind of goes without saying, but, I feel like really staying on top of mobility work has kept me healthy. I've been fortunate to have not had an injury in the last decade that's taken me out of running. And as it's like the ability to be able to stack consistent training blocks like that is really, where the pudding is.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. That's a huge deal. Congrats on that.
Thank you.
That's a lot of
I appreciate
work.
that. Yeah. No. Like, the caveat being is like, I haven't been training at a very high level, for 10 years straight or anything like that. Many professional runners have, but I specifically have not. But I've just kind of gradually built my way up. And again, like I said, I feel very, very fortunate to have been able to string together that many years of health, because I know it's not common, and I know it's never like guaranteed either. So
So Stefanie, can we ask you, like, what are some of the things that you do when you're doing your dynamic stretching and you're doing your mobility and your strength? Would you talk us through a few of the key things that you might do in a day?
I use a band, like a super, super long band. And I do kind of just a series of active isolated stretches that kind of start with the more proximal muscle groups. So I really start with working on my hamstrings and my quads, and then I kind of just move further down the chain. And I really just focus on every single little muscle group. it sounds like it would be laborious, but it's really only like a 10-minute routine. I'm happy to share like a great link that I have that kind of walks you through all of those stretches. They're very basic, honestly. But I feel like that's kind of the key in staying consistent with something is a simple routine. It's not extreme. It takes me 10 minutes a day to do. It's something honestly more like recent that I've started incorporating, honestly, at the recommendation of my coach. But I really enjoy kind of the consistency of it. It's something that's just kind of a part of my day, a part of my routine. And it's become something that I honestly look forward to because it feels good too. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of strength work, I have found a lot of benefit in lifting fairly heavy. My husband and I have been kind of like hoarding different weights over the years at our little home gym. But yeah, I've definitely found benefit in, increasing the load. We have a great trap bar here at home that was like the best investment we made. But yeah, just like, I'm not like a certified strength coach or anything like that, but, just all the basic movements, I can't underscore that enough, like basic squatting, basic deadlifting, any single leg work. I feel like that's been really, really helpful for me. And anything that's just really functional to running. So I'm definitely not someone that's sitting there and doing like 30 bicep curls at once or anything like that. But things, like I said, that are functional to running. And I try to keep it as basic as possible so that it's sustainable for me.
Mm. Yeah, sustainability is key, especially I can imagine just from my more limited experience, as a marathoner, not an ultra marathoner, sure. the energy that we have, there's only so much energy.
Right.
And so choosing those things and developing the routines that are sustainable, right, like you said, is what's going to keep us in the game.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that being said, how do you manage, you're a busy person and you have you're also a professional runner, but you're also, in the medical field. So how do you manage that? And how do you know when your energies are low?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm definitely someone that likes, and anyone listening, they're like, oh my gosh, she always says this. But I'm definitely someone that builds rest. I build that into my schedule. And I know that might seem a lot easier said than done. Again, I don't have children either. So I know that adds like a totally different element for a lot of listeners. But I'm really, really big on not neglecting my sleep. Like if I'm not able to get, that for me, it's at the 8-hour mark. I wish I could get more than that, but typically 8 hours is really what I have in my schedule. But if I'm not hitting that mark, I have no issue with backing off, on the whether it's the intensity of the run the next day, the length of the run. To me, it's more important to get my rest in and to be sure that I'm recovering, as opposed to trying to force the mileage of, like I said, the intensity. In terms of kind of like balancing everything, I'm definitely a work in progress. When it comes to that. But for me, it's just kind of knowing myself. I'm a morning person. So it's like, I know I have to get to bed early and, because I do my best work like early in the morning. I'd much rather get my, my quality session in before I head to work, as opposed to putting it off until I'm really tired at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. It comes down to like knowing myself and then just kind of working through my priorities. And sometimes that means, maybe not watching, an hour of Netflix or something like that. Well, I love doing that. I feel like I've gotten, I've had to become more efficient and just kind of identifying time in my day where it's like, okay, like I just don't have time to scroll through Instagram right now. Like I can do that later, but I can instead get, X, Y, and Z done in that 30-minute time span, and it might to some sound like kind of like over scheduling and being like really meticulous with things, but you'll make time for what's important to you. So
yeah. And I think it would be impossible to do what you're doing at the level you're doing it without being able to guard your time in that way.
Right.
If you kind of have to be meticulous, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. So, yeah.
So we've talked about some of the training and what it looks like for you to handle the load and the physical aspect of it. Thanks for sharing that, by the way. That was generous of you.
Yeah.
And then let's talk about the races. And I mean, these are like whole animals in and of themselves.
Yeah.
For having to employ strategies. So let's first talk again about the physical strategies going into 100-mile race, for instance.
In what, like more specifically, like what regard?
Yeah. So I guess let's talk about pacing, because you had mentioned it before. Let's talk about pacing. Like how do you know, because you're not doing 100-milers every day, what indicators in your runs?
That's a great question. Yeah. So, from a pacing perspective, the 100-mile distance should, if we're kind of extrapolating out from like, say, like my marathon effort to 50K effort to 50-mile effort, the 100-mile effort for me and for everyone really should feel extremely easy. It should never feel like you're really pushing the envelope, especially from the get-go. So for me, I definitely, I'm not so fixated on pace. I usually have a speed limit. I know like, okay, so like, 720 is like on paper, yes, that's in my easy range. I frequently run that pace, here in Colorado at altitude. And yeah, it feels easy. But if I start out at that pace, for a 100-mile race, that's a little bit too much for me. That's just not quite my fitness level. So for me, I always have to be sure that, okay, yes, it should feel very easy. And then on top of it, it should feel even easier. So how I kind of approached Tunnel Hill was I had a chat through with my coach, and we decided on kind of a firm speed limit for me. And I followed that to a T, because I know what the 100-mile distance can feel like if you really push the envelope, especially for that first 50K, even through like 100K. So for me, that looked like 740 pace. And I think I was really right around that mark for a very long time, which told me that, my perceived effort was right on, where it should be. So, anything can happen in 100 miles, but kind of at every point, the pace should feel sustainable. It should never feel like you're overreaching. There are certain points where you have to kind of make a decision in terms of like, if you're racing, if you're running for place, things like that, of course. But for me, it's really getting to that 100K mark and then seeing what kind of I have left, to hang strong and pull through, especially for those last like 20 to 25 miles. So, yeah,
I can really appreciate that, Stephanie, because Zach and I talk about a lot about running by effort.
Yeah.
And being able to train what the effort should feel like, because circumstances are different, courses are different.
Yeah.
And if we hold ourselves early on, like you said, if we know I could run 720 pace.
Yeah.
But then I know later on that might mean something different. Like having pace be more like a place I shouldn't go in the first part of a race. Having that as some feedback. So I guess that brings me to the question of, what does the watch do for you in a race, and do you use it? Do you look at it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like we've chatted about this like through social media and stuff. But you may have noticed too that especially with my coaching, anytime I have an athlete that asks me like what my kind of overall coaching philosophy is, it really comes down to, I want all my athletes to be running by effort. I really could care less if they even had a GPS watch, because that's how we become truly intuitive and intelligent athletes. The last thing I want is for either myself or any of my athletes to be just, these kind of robotic, strictly runners that are just so fixated on our watch and what our splits say. Data is important. And of course, paces, are important, especially if we're going for, specific and competitive time goals. But at the end of the day, you have to be so in tune with your body and know like, okay, I'm at the halfway point right now. Like, this is when I need to make a move. You should be able to work through all those decision-making processes, determining if you're overreaching. Have you been holding back? Are you able to make that go, or that move? Without having to look down at your watch and be like, okay, now I have to do, 6th grade math to try to figure out, we hear that so commonly. But it really comes down to, the important thing to me is that I want to be sure that I am so in tune with my body that I'm becoming the kind of best, well-rounded athlete that I can be. Besides, just putting myself in this corner as, an ultra runner. I want to know that I'm listening to my body and I'm respecting it. So.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah.
That's the best thing that we can do for ourselves is
Yeah.
listen to our bodies.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like, with, in the addition of like strength work, my nutrition, things like that, I feel like becoming so intuitive and knowing when I'm maybe pushing it too much, or when I need to, keep my foot on the gas, that is what has kept me healthy and probably able to race to the ability that I've been able to do in the past couple of years. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of listening to your body during a race, and you've done all the strength training, you've done all the work, but you get fatigued and maybe the 100-miler exposes some kind of weakness, or there's something mechanically that just kind of gets messed up during the race. Like you step kind of wrong.
Yeah.
Is there something that you do within the race to like do a body check and get yourself like back on track?
Yeah. That's something that I definitely employed this past weekend. I feel like anytime I line up for a 100-miler, I'm never lining up thinking like, this is going to be great. I'm never going to hurt at any point. I'm so fit. It's going to be just rainbows the whole time. I'm never lining up. Like I wish. But no, I'm always kind of in the back of my mind. I'm like, okay, like, when the fatigue sets in, when like the form might start to break down. There's definitely like very specific mile markers for me when it's like, okay, like I'm tired, like it's, the sun's going down now. So yeah, I definitely go through like a head to toe check, and I just, like I said, I mean, it's exactly how it sounds. I start from the top, I work my way down. I try to identify anything that's like really bothering me, whether that's, like you said, from a mechanical standpoint, like am I compensating weird, anything like that. I remember coming through, I think I was right around mile 45, and I like felt this piece of gravel go into my shoe. And I was like, oh gosh, I'm like, I really don't want to have to stop to like shake this out. But I also really didn't want it to just start causing this massive blister on the bottom of my foot. So that was kind of something where I was like, okay, that's, on my list, my head to toe checklist. I'm like, I really need to address that so that it doesn't become something like enormous to where I'm limping or walking it in, the last 10 miles. But yeah, like I said, I frequently do like head to toe checks, and things are transient too. Like I remember this past weekend, like I was nearing, I think mile like 16 or something. And in my mind, I was kind of thinking like, oh my gosh, like my right hip flexor like feels a little bit off. Like it feels like it's tired already or something. And then I was like, okay, like I'll be mindful of it. And then like 4 miles later, I went through like the 20-mile split and I didn't feel anything anymore. So it's things like that where it's just it's just kind of working through and then being like, okay, is this something that's serious, or is it more of something where it's just like, oh, I don't know, it just happens to be feeling this way in this moment. And just being realistic too. I always want to address something, like I said, before it turns into something greater. And I feel like doing so during those types of races, and even doing that, like even in shorter distance races too, like even like the 10K half marathon. I mean, I feel like there's value in doing that just so that you're kind of aware, you have that self-awareness. And it's a learning point too, for future races. So
most definitely.
Yeah.
And like addressing something early, I think that's a really good point. Cause I was thinking like, oh, something's hurting and then think about it. But I really like that you go through it periodically during the race, even something that you might not even notice or like ignore, like a piece of gravel in your shoe would like annoy you for a second, but you could probably ignore it for a few miles.
Right. Yeah.
But in a 100-mile race, like you said, it could be devastating.
Yeah.
In a marathon, it could be devastating as well. So that's really great advice there, doing head to toe checks.
Yeah. I even found myself doing that with fueling too. I kind of do a mixture of, liquid calories and solid calories. And for whatever reason for me, like I enjoy using liquid calories, but sometimes I don't get that same like full feeling, when you like are actually chewing and eating something. I'm not a registered dietitian, but I do know that is like a physiological response where you typically do feel fuller if you've actually been chewing your food. But at one point during the race, I started to feel that kind of like empty gut feeling, like I was, that kind of gnawing hunger despite using liquid calories. So for me, that was kind of a part of my head to toe check. It's like, okay, like in 2 miles at the next aid, I need to be grabbing something more substantial so that I can address that, even though it might not be a caloric deficit issue. It's just that feeling that I was getting. And I'm like, I don't want to have that feeling. So let's address it now. Just as another example. So.
That's a great example. So moving from the physical to the mental aspect of doing long distance races.
Yeah.
I listened to a podcast that you were on talking about the 100-miler, I guess you've been, they both were 100-milers, but the USATF US championship.
Yeah.
And just like kind of the end stages where you're just like staying ahead, like, cause you were ahead and you needed to hold your lead. So can you talk us through some of the mental strains, some of the mental tactics, like things that you do within a race to stay mentally engaged?
Yeah. I feel I can't underscore this enough, and this too, but the mental aspect for me is like so much more critical than the physical aspect. Again, like we've said, like, you can't get away with just lining up for 100-miler on like no training. But if you don't have that solid, like mental strength and that base going in, like you're going to get eaten up, because it's always going to hurt, and the same thing with any other distance too. Like it's never, we don't train for it to become easy, and that's, the classic saying is like, it never gets easier. You just get stronger. For me, it has been years of sharpening my mental strength in order to be able to push through and hold like these kinds of paces for this long. I definitely employ mantras. I feel like in the past, I used to use more like kind of like inspirational mantras, which are certainly very, very effective and helpful. But for me, like at this point, it's not so much a matter of like, okay, like I just want to finish this thing. It's definitely like, okay, I have to maintain this pace. So for me, that comes down to like, choosing a word or something like that, engages me to focus on my cadence, my form, quick feet. So let's see, this past weekend, I always hit a point where it's like, okay, that I feel like I'm maintaining the same effort, but I glance down at my watch, and I'm starting to see like 8s or 9s or something like that. So for me, I just started kind of like chanting, like just in my head, like focus, focus, focus. Just like using very simple tactics, just to like keep me on track. I focused on my cadence and keeping it high. It's one of those things where, like we said, like it's always going to hurt. But I know that in my mind, I've trained for it. I've trained to get to that point and then to be able to push through that kind of pain. And really it's, sometimes I even barter with myself too. I'm like, it sounds very, very ridiculous, but sometimes I'm like, the faster you can get to this aid station, the faster you're going to get to the finish, and the faster you can get home and be with the dogs. Like, sometimes it's just kind of talking yourself through it, and like confronting those kind of demons that you're going to confront out there, when your body's like, this is enough. Like, this is enough physical exertion. Like, why are we doing this? Really sharpening that, those mental tools, is the difference between you having a successful race, and then you kind of giving up and lifting your foot off the gas. So
yeah, having to stay engaged like that is so critical, and having a plan. I found for me personally that I've had to do that. Otherwise, if I am left without a mental plan, I tend to have a hard time coming up with positive things to say to myself. And then also I like the quick feet, drive your knees, like let's do a heel lift for a while. To see if it, can engage more of my muscles that have been dormant, So I think that is super, super important. And something I'm wondering for your races, Stefanie, it's hard sometimes, at least for me, when I'm running and I'm not running like I'm going somewhere because the end is so far away. So I'm like, there's a good thing about being present in the moment, but then sometimes when I'm present in the moment, I'll lose some of my drive because I forget that I'm actually running towards the finish line. Do you ever have that happen?
I do, especially like I always try to take things 1 mile at a time, like regardless of the distance I'm lining up for. But I mean, that's a lot of miles when it's a 100-mile race. It's like I, like you said, I do to always try to stay present in the moment, but then sometimes my mind starts to wander and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I have to run 40 more miles. Like I've already like what I've ran 60 miles so far, but I still have so far to go. So when I start to hit that point, I kind of like I try to just like disengage from like how far I have left. And I try to focus on how strong I've been running up until this point. And I try to use that as motivation. Like you didn't come this far to only come this far. Like, let's not think about like, how many hours I still have left on my feet for those like remaining 40 miles. But instead focus on like, oh my gosh, I just went through 100K. Like that's the fastest I've ever gone through 100K before. All I'm asking of myself now is just to maintain, and at that point, it's really like, you're not really going to be dropping faster miles than you have already. So that for me is also kind of calming. And I know that's more of like a very specific to the 100-mile distance, maybe not necessarily the marathon. But for me, it's definitely not allowing my mind to get like too far, like away from me. And just knowing, that like I've done it before, like I'll do it again. And I never also like, I don't ever give myself an out either. Like I never think like, oh, let's just start walking now, or let's just, let's sit down at this age. Now I'm using those as examples, just very specific to my like last couple races. Of course, like I'm not encouraging not sitting down or taking breaks like during a 100-mile race. But for me and my specific goals, it's like, I try not to give myself those outs. It's like, you're fine. Like I'm continuing to do my head to toe checks. Nothing is wrong. Like there's no need to hit the panic button. You can continue forward progress and continue moving forward, putting one foot in front of the other, because there's nothing wrong. You're fine. You've trained for this. You're still in a safe place, and you can do this. So those are just kind of like the ways I talk to myself, when things are starting to get like, oh, okay, like this is, it's been hours upon hours and I still have a lot of time left to go. So.
So it sounds to me, Stefanie, like there's two types of people, I guess. I didn't know this until like last year, but those who say words to themselves in their heads, and then those who like see pictures and they don't actually like have words going through their head. So you have words going through your head.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. I'm definitely someone that like, it's kind of weird, but like you have to be very like comfortable with yourself and who you are. Like, I know that sounds very existential, but like in the kind of race that I just ran, like there was a lot of times where I was alone for a long time. Now that's not always how it is for 100 milers, but by nature of Tunnel Hill, the field gets very spread out. No, I was really hoping to have a lot more men to work with this year, but we had three like world-class fast men. And then I was just kind of a little bit further ahead than the remaining rest of the men's field. But yeah, I have found that I have to really like love who I am and like the person I am. I know that sounds silly, but because like I'm really the only one that I'm like out there with. It's like I have to have that type of almost like friendship and relationship with myself in order to be able to successfully like nail the race, that I trained for. And I think that, but I think that goes, that's kind of the same thing, how it has to be for any distance or really anything we're doing in life. It's like, if you're constantly fighting yourself, mentally, or even, I don't know, just who you are at your core, like you're not ever going to get the best out of yourself, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah. Very profound, very true.
I know.
We got to spend all this time with ourselves.
I mean, yeah, it's like it's so strange, but it's like I almost like in these types of races, it's almost like me, the one that's running, and then like my internal like brain. It's like almost two separate people. And I'm trying to like get them to just mesh well and work together and not fight each other. And I know it sounds so like corny and like I'm trying to be like extra wise with this, but I mean, really at the root of it, that's kind of what it feels like out there.
It is extra wise. And I had never thought of it that way. And it is so true.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we're putting our minds and our bodies and our desires while listening to the feedback that we're getting from our bodies and making these decisions and trying to put these two people of ourselves together for a whole person.
It's really interesting. But I feel like, it's running is so much, especially like ultra running it can be so like philosophical, which is really neat to me. So.
Well, Stefanie, I could talk to you for much longer with all of the expertise that you have. And I love this conversation. So many great things to chat about. And I'm excited to chat more with you and to follow your journey and share with our audience how they connect with you. What is the best way for them to connect with you, Stefanie?
Yeah, I'm primarily on Instagram. So that's probably the best way to connect with me.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much and good luck in your future racing.
Thank you for having me, Andy.
What a great conversation with Stefanie. I wanted to take notes during that whole thing. So what I did was later,
you didn't take notes?
I did take notes. I listened back to it and was taking some notes because just a lot of great information there. And of course, Stefanie and her experience is able to give us some amazing advice about how to endure the load of running. One thing she said that I loved was you have to be able to bulletproof your body. And all the preventative measures Stefanie takes, even without injury lurking in the corner. I think that is really a key takeaway because like I am actively doing a lot of mobility and strength exercises because I have injury lurking in the corner. But even those of you who don't have injury lurking in the corner, this is how she stayed injury-free for 10 years. So I think it's really impressive and also a great lesson to us all.
Yeah, and if you haven't been running in Kevlar, at least take her advice and do so that you will be
what is that?
More bulletproof.
I see.
Also, two big points. First is the need to prepare properly in all of the different ways. And so in considering how best to prepare for the thing, it's not just what training I need to do, it's all the stuff. Yeah. And so she reflected on that a bit, and I appreciated that because it's good to remember that the kind of event you're doing requires certain kinds of specific preparation.
Yeah.
But for an ultra marathoner to say, you still need to do like faster stuff too, then clearly if you're a marathoner, that applies just as readily. But the question is why? And so if these are the things where if I don't know, I need to ask those questions. These things are good things to do. Do you know why? Mm-hmm. Find out if you don't. Mm-hmm. The second point that I just want to dwell on briefly, as Andy was noting, but more precisely, dynamic flexibility. And she mentioned active isolated flexibility, which is the Wharton's specific method, is game-changing for her. And naturally for nearly everyone who discovers it for the first time.
Andy and
there's
Zach
a reason.
as well.
There's a reason why Phil Wharton is globally sought after to help runners. Because it works very, very well. So good reflections from Stefanie. Good considerations for us all. And with that, let's go ahead and touch on the world of running.
First of all, congratulations to many turkey trotters out there for 2021. Awesome races and fun had by many, including the winning of pies in the Ripley household. Lots of fun stuff. Well, I do want to note one of our A to Z runners. Well, we had many A to Z runners who did turkey trots, but one that we wanted to give a special shout out today, Ashley, who ran a 25-minute PR in the 8K.
The 8K.
Uh-huh.
Which basically means she ran 5 minutes per mile faster than previously. Mm-hmm. And I'm being literal there. So, yes, that is excellent work. Nice job, Ashley. And very exciting to see the progress over time with something like that. Mm-hmm. Very cool. So congrats to all. Yeah. Now, number one on our list of 3 is the Hachioji long distance meet from Japan. Now, you know, because we've done this before, we really enjoy reporting things from Japan Running News. That site is just incredible because they just give you so much good detail, and I like the detail. Well, this did not disappoint. So at the Hachioji meet, they were running 10,000 meter heats, and one of the things with these kinds of track meets is it's always very focused. You know, this is a long distance meet intended for people to come out and run fast in the 10,000 meters.
On the track, by the way.
On the track. And so that's exactly what they did. Now, I have to simply dwell on this for just a moment, that this is not surprising to those of us who've been paying attention to where distance running is going in Japan right now. It's not surprising because things are happening over there, and there's two very clear reasons.
Happening fast.
So look at that. The first reason is because they are very successful in the last 50 years of continually developing high-quality distance runners. They follow excellent coaching protocols, and it's a well-oiled machine in terms of just how the training programs and the different levels, you know, from youth up through the university levels. But the other thing about Japan and their distance running scene is how much money the corporate scene is putting into the sport. So there's tons of opportunity. Like, there's dollars everywhere for runners who can get to show up and try to you know, prove themselves.
Yeah, it's really neat. And it was also one of the reasons why the Tokyo Olympics even happened, was because of these sponsors that also sponsor these runners. They're very highly invested in the sport culture in Japan, and then running is a very important sport.
It is indeed.
It should be everywhere, but
so having that context, now you know then why this was not surprising to hear that they broke a record for the number of men who ran under 28 minutes in a single heat of the 10,000 meter run. Yes, the number of men. And so what it was 21 different men ran under 28 minutes. The fastest being Evans Kietani, who runs for Toyota Boshuku, and he ran 27:28, winning the race by 0.2 of a second, or a quarter of a second, basically. And that was excellent. But then behind him, 20 more men before the 28-minute barrier. The previous best was 20 in a single heat. So 20, they beat it by 1. And by the way, that was at the Olympics. When the last time. So like an international stage were the very best across the entire world. This was just a single distance running meet in Japan. And there were not just Japanese runners. I think 8 of them were Japanese.
Yeah, 8 of 21 were
8
Japanese.
of 21 were Japanese. Look at that. You've got the note right there. So 8 of 21 were Japanese, which means, you know, certainly still international, but by no means grabbing every fastest runner from the entire world.
Right,
either. So that's incredible. Good stuff. Now, in addition to that, so 21 did it in a single heat. Another 14 ran under 28 minutes in the next heat. And so that meant 35 men in a single day, in a single meet. That wow. I'm shocked and amazed in all of these things.
Amazing.
So
Very
that's good.
Impressive.
But good things were happening in another part of the world as well.
The Manchester Road Race. Now there are, like I mentioned, a lot of turkey trotts all over the country, but the one in Manchester holds some special. It's a big meet, and they bring in some great talent.
And it's a random distance.
It's a random distance. The race was first held in 1927, and the race distance is 4.748 miles, which is 7.641 kilometers.
Okay, listen, people, listen. In 1927, they didn't set races because they were 5,000 meters. They set races because they went from here and ended over here.
Okay.
And wherever the path is they took was the race.
All right.
That is why that distance is so random.
And it probably is why it's so popular, maybe.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Perhaps because it's kind of a different distance and you don't have a lot to compare it to. We talked about that with Erica Kemp. You know, different race distances can bring new life to a race.
Something interesting.
Well, in the men's race, Ben Flanagan pulled away from the field just before the 2-mile mark of the 4.748.
You don't have to read the exact
mile
distance every
race.
time you say it.
And he won by 12 seconds, which is significant. And our previous podcast guest, Sam Chalenga, was third in the race. The women's race, Wayne
Kaladi.
Yeah,
she's
I bet
taking
we
the
would
world
talk about
by
her
storm
constantly
right now. Remember, this is her debut pro season. She was collegiate, and only just this year now, just this fall, began running professionally, and she's just crushing everything.
Yeah, Kaladi led from the gun, and she was never really challenged too much, and she set a new course record of 22:55, which was a minute and 2 seconds off the old record.
Whoa.
And previous podcast guest, Kira D'Amato, was second, and she also broke the previous course record by 8 seconds.
Oh, man.
Yeah. These
So,
women are flying. That's average of
running.
450 per mile pace.
And listen, when someone can beat Kira D'Amato by nearly a minute also in a race, Kaladi is just rocket. She is rocket. It's crazy.
Now,
good stuff to see.
Yeah, and this is also some more Thanksgiving news. The official fastest known turkey world record was...
Which, by the way,
one,
for clarity, that's not a real turkey. That's a person dressed as a
yes,
turkey.
Fastest known turkey.
I intentionally kept that vague in the introduction.
Okay,
that's
great.
why I'm clarifying.
So that was broken by Olympian Molly Seidel.
Wasn't it her own record previously?
But no, because it was unofficial.
Well,
and now it's actually an official
is this
record.
official?
Yes.
How do you make that official?
I mean, I'm quoting Canadian news, so
it's official because Canadian news reported it. Okay, I'll go with that.
I'll blame them if it's not. I don't know. So Seidel actually went about a minute slower than last year's time that she set, and that was virtual. So now she ran it in an actual race, and that was 35:34, and she was first place in the race.
Well,
for the 10K.
To her
Just let you know,
credit,
10K.
This is only like 2.5 weeks after the New York Marathon that she ran. So maybe a minute slower than the previous time she did it is probably forgivable.
And I guess she had like a tail malfunction. I read it in a different...
Tail malfunction?
Yeah.
Don't ask too many questions.
I read that
when you
in a
dress
different
like a
article.
turkey,
I can't remember who to credit
happen.
for that, but yes. Yep.
Okay.
That's what happens when you dress as the fastest known turkey.
And also when you're just super fast runner, period, and run anything, dressed as anything, you're probably going to set some kind of record.
Yeah, and I think it's just fun that Molly keeps it fresh. She does some fun things.
The question is, was she flapping her wings the whole time? Because if
that
you've
would be
ever seen a
hard.
turkey run all out, there's a lot of flapping and squawking.
Oh.
Maybe not the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty fast to have to do that.
And with that, there's plenty more to say, so stick around next week for more interesting tidbits from the world of running. But for now, we have appreciated your time listening to our words. And now what we would want is your words so that we can read them to you on air. So go to the places where the things are said and comment and share questions, share your thoughts, ideas, and insights, because really what we like to do the most is talk about the things that you're thinking about or asking about or talking about. Yeah. So join the conversation. Go on the social media places. Instagram's the easiest one to do because we post there most often. But then also, of course, if you're on YouTube, it's great to add the comments. Drop them down in there so that people think there's actually real humans listening and watching on YouTube.
That would be nice. Well, we appreciate all of you and connecting with you. It is the season of gratitude, so I did want to express our gratitude, Zach and I, for your listenership and how you've connected with us. We really appreciate you tuning in.
That we do. So stick around next week for another one. Until then.